Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the 2023 Virginia Volunteer Summit. Unfortunately, this is our last day. All good things must come to an end. However, I've had the pleasure and the honor of being restored and rejuvenated and repurposing my passion in my work and in my community with you all collectively. As we begin to have people join us this morning, I ask that you will just put your biggest takeaways that you have had over the past 2 days in the chat, if you would. Or what are some of the things that you're most looking forward to putting into action when you get back home? Yesterday, we've talked about pairing passion and purpose to our own work and in our partnerships. Today, we're going to focus on the potential of taking that passion and purpose and what it looks like putting it together and how to make that possible by helping others find their passion and purpose or seeing what can happen as a result of people feeling empowered to act. We see that there is a lot that can happen. This morning, we're going to take a look at how to engage and mobilize others and look at what it takes to tackle and gain the results that we're looking for. To get us started this morning in this conversation, I'm going to hand it over to Andy Bates from SIR to introduce himself in this morning's panel. Andy?
Hi, thanks so much, Curtis, for that introduction, and welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be joining you again here for day three. As Curtis said, we're going to be looking at how we start to mobilize against some of the findings from our Virginia Community Engagement Index study. Um, if you were not able to participate in the session and presentation on Tuesday that really dove into these findings in a lot more detail, you can find that presentation in the resources section in the AirMeet platform. But today I am going to walk us through, hopefully very quickly in about 20 minutes, some of the top line findings from that report. And we'll bring up a panel of people who have been involved with this project for the duration of it since we started back last fall. To give their thoughts and perspectives on how we start to bring some of these insights and data points to action. And so just want to thank you all again. Thank the panelists for being here as well, and hopefully we'll have some great fruitful discussion on how we can take these insights into our work moving forward. With that in mind, I just wanted to give a quick background on the process that we used to arrive at some of these findings. Where we really wanted to start was by building a coalition, and that stems from everything that Serve Virginia did as part of its state service plan. Is really about aligning and integrating this network of partners. And so we really wanted to bring as many organizations and representatives from those organizations into the fold as we could. You can see that we put together a core team with representatives from about 39 organizations throughout Virginia. And we would just ask them point blank, what do we as an ecosystem truly want a study like this to accomplish? What are the specific data points and insights that we think will be most beneficial for all of these sectors you see represented here? And what we really found from these conversations was that we wanted a study and a data set that was really going to be reflective of Virginia, unique to Virginia. There are, national studies that have been done by Gallup and by that the AmeriCorps sponsors with the U.S. Census for their community engagement and volunteering supplement. But we really wanted to dig in a little bit deeper into Virginia, identify the strengths of the ecosystem, see where people are truly engaging, and also finally, the main priority was to see what they were really recognizing as the key issues to address in their communities. And so this group really helped us come up with our survey questions and how we ask those questions. And once we had our survey, we distributed it from January 30th through March 8th of this year. And before we dive into some of the findings themselves, just want to talk about and frame how we are thinking about these participants and who they are and the experiences they bring with them. Because when we look at how we distributed the survey, there are some key takeaways. So we sent out the survey through two primary modes. One was through our survey panel providers, Qualtrics and Cint. We received 3,099 responses through that channel. We also leaned on our core team member organizations to distribute the survey out to their networks as well. And so through that channel, we received 3,294 responses. Now, what's unique about these folks is that if I'm agreeing to be part of a research panel, I'm probably a little bit more likely to be engaged. I'm saying, yes, you can contact me. I would love to give my opinion on a variety of topics. And so they're potentially more apt to be engaged just by virtue of agreeing to do that. And when we think about who our core team members were able to get, they're significantly more likely to be engaged because they're already in that network. They're in this ecosystem. And so when we think about this nearly 6,400 total participants, we really want to be thinking of them as engaged Virginians or more likely to be engaged Virginians, not necessarily everyday Virginians or the general public. Again, this was an intentional choice on our part because we really wanted to gain a clearer and more cohesive and comprehensive view of what's really happening in the realm of civic and community engagement throughout Virginia. What the size of this total population allows us to do is really dig into those motivations, the barriers, and the ways that people are engaging that don't necessarily fit into that traditional volunteerism bucket. But what it really allows us to do, and if you want to see more about the key respondent demographics, again, I'll ask you to check out the full presentation in the resources section. But because we had so many responses, we had double than what we were anticipating. That has allowed us to really be able to weight the data so that it is representative of age, race, gender, ethnicity, income levels, and by region. So it really allows us to segment and look at different data points and connect the dots a little bit more than if we had just had a couple of thousand responses. And so we'll get into some of what those responses are, but I wanted to frame our focus today and really the panel as well on how we use some of this data to mobilize. And so when we think about mobilizing more Virginians, the number one thing we wanted to start with was really determine the challenges or priorities that we want to address in our communities. Again, we really wanted to be sure that we weren't just flooding organizations with more volunteers through a recruitment or ad campaign, but to really give them the opportunity to think about what they're passionate about, the needs that they're seeing around them, and then channeling them to ways that they can make a difference against those needs. We also wanted to really get a handle, as I said, on the community engagement landscape, this ecosystem. What are the actions that people are engaging in? What do they think will be most effective when it comes to making a difference against their priorities and their passions? And then how are they already giving of their time, talent, and voices? We wanted to color that, though, while also looking at some issues of trust and self-agency. Who are the organizations and the sectors that people trust to do what is right and to make a difference against these priorities? And then from there, using all of that information, how do we invite and support more people to give of their time, talent, and voices to address those issues? So when we start with what the priorities are, we first asked respondents to think about what their top three priorities are for Virginia as a state. And then we asked them to think a little bit more closer to home and think about what the top three priorities are for where they live. And you see here, they're relatively in line. Education, health, well-being, and housing are the top three for both statewide and local priorities. But I want to call out something, and for those of you who are in the higher ed convening session around some of this data as well, this came up, and I think it's an important thing to note is that these bucket area priorities, these are not necessarily meant to be exclusive. As you all know, none of these areas exist in a vacuum. Education plays a significant role in a person's health and well-being and their economic security, which then greatly influences their housing options, and public safety, which then in turn influence health. They all connect to each other. And this was really our first attempt to try to get a firmer handle on how people were responding with their minds and hearts from a top line perspective. We then ask them to rate some specific needs and priority areas within these bucket areas. And so as we bring this work into our daily lives and work, we can begin to really pinpoint some specific areas of need. But this was kind of our first best temperature check that we could get without asking survey respondents to consider 35 different community priorities. Again, when we ask them, okay, these are your priorities, what do you think are going to be the most effective actions to address these priorities? We ask them to rate community education and outreach, philanthropic donations, political action, policy change, and lawmaking, and also volunteerism and service. And what we found for 9 out of these 10 priority areas, respondents most often chose community education and outreach and political action, policy change, and lawmaking as the most effective actions we should be taking to address these needs. And so, what that really caused us to ask ourselves is if they feel education and outreach and political actions are most effective, to what extent are they engaging in these acts? And we wanted to start with civic action. And what we find here is that the most direct actions respondents are most likely to take involve voting and making non-political donations. And beyond that, when we start, and you can see the significant difference, especially with voting, in terms of this next level here, of education, outreach, and political action, we really started to consider these in terms of how much time, effort, and putting yourself out there do these things require. And so when we think about attending a public meeting to discuss a local issue versus, say, signing a petition or posting on social media, we tended to find that those lower touch avenues of civic action tended to rise to the top here. And so we just start to see that people are more apt to hit that share button than they are to stand in front of an elected body. But if they are saying that political action, policy change, and lawmaking are one of the most effective actions we should be taking, why aren't they doing more than voting? If we go back here, we see that 68% are voting, and the next kind of political action is all the way down at 34%, so half. One of the reasons why they may not be engaging in more politically motivated activities and civic action can be answered with trust levels. We ask them to trust on a scale of 1 to 5 the following institutions, how much they trust them to do what is right. And we see that fewer than 1/3 of respondents say they trust the government to do what is right. We also wanted to dig into that beyond trust and asked them how effective they felt it would be for them personally to present a concern or idea to a member of their local or state government. And again, what we see here is that only 1 in 4 respondents felt that bringing an issue before their local government was an effective use of their time. And that number is even lower when they think about presenting a concern or idea to state government. So from civic action, we really wanted to dig into what are the other things that people are doing? And that's really that volunteerism and service bucket. And so we started by trying to get a handle on what are some of the informal ways that we engage in our communities with our neighbors in ways that improve our lives that have been kind of hard to quantify and capture and measure in the past. And when we asked them if they had done favors for their neighbors and things of that nature, roughly 7 in 10 said that they've done those types of acts within the past year. And more than half of those who said they did say they do so more than once a month. So there's a lot of neighborhood trust and community action that's happening that doesn't necessarily rise up to the level of what we traditionally think of as volunteerism, but nonetheless have a role to play in how we live our lives and the fulfillment we get out of our daily lives. We then asked them to consider whether they had spent any time volunteering for an organization or association in the past 12 months. So that's really that more formal, organized volunteerism bucket. And what we found here was that 59% said yes right off the bat. For those of you who are keeping tabs on the national volunteering indicators, these numbers, I'm sure, feel pretty high, and they are. The CEV census supplement, for example, lists this same indicator at 26%. But again, I want to call your attention back to how the survey was distributed, who we talked to, and the intentional choice to just kind of see what engagement in Virginia is looking like, not necessarily the general public. And so when we do that, we see that we have a pretty high rate because this group was more likely to be engaged. Regardless of the discrepancy in those numbers, or whether or not you feel this fits with the national trend of volunteerism being down, which we all can agree and see in our daily lives that it is, and that there's still a need to mobilize volunteers. One of the key trends that from one of the key national trends that still holds is that when prompted to consider some additional activities that they may do, when you ask the no and the unsure folks, whether they had done some of these things, 19% changed from a no to a yes when prompted to broaden their definition of volunteerism. And as you see here at the bottom of the screen, respondents who identified as Black or Hispanic and Latino were much more likely than white respondents to change their answer to a yes as well. And so really what this boils down to is that there's a lot of energy, a lot of civic action, a lot of engagement that's happening that doesn't necessarily get considered as traditional volunteering, or people don't consider them as such. Really quickly here, just also wanted to gauge where people are giving of their time through volunteerism. And so for those who did volunteer, we see that youth and education, hunger relief, the houses of worship or religious organizations, hospitals, health organizations, and their kind of neighborhood level and recreational associations rise to the top here. And so, again, I'm sorry to go through this so quickly, but I really want to make time for our panelists, our brilliant panelists, to speak to some of this as well. And so after we started thinking about, okay, here's how they're volunteering and giving of their time, talent, and voices, here's where they're volunteering, what's motivating them to do it? Because that's really the type of thing that's going to help us motivate more people. And so for the total respondent population, we found that when we asked them, what are some of the reasons you started volunteering or giving back? We found that simply being invited or encouraged was a really strong motivator to get involved. You see here that the top response, 30%, said that it was an important part of their house of worship or spirituality that really got them involved. And we see that 22% say that they were encouraged or given opportunities to give back in their formative years at school. Beyond that invitation, we find that some of these top motivations to start volunteering were really driven by some of those personal experiences that people have, whether they've been helped or whether they've experienced injustice or whether they've simply learned about something that inspires them to act. Once we got a handle on how they get into volunteerism and civic engagement, we then asked them, okay, what keeps you coming back? Because that is the thing that we really want to focus on. Why do they continue to volunteer? And when we ask them this question, we see that just those feelings of fulfillment and appreciation for having helped really rise to the top. And also having given something of yourself, your experiences, your skills, your knowledge in a way that helps others is a prime motivator for why people continue to give back. And then the third one of these top three is really around those social aspects of volunteerism that perhaps we don't often tout as much. The fact that it is a good way to just get out there, stay active, make friends, meet new people. And that is an important reason why people come back as well. In this second tier, we see here that, again, those kind of deep-seated experiences or beliefs and lived experiences really do factor into why someone continues to do it, whether that is just the desire to make a difference against the need, to know what it's like to struggle, or to, again, gain some exposure to new things. To dig into some of these motivations a little bit further, though, we wanted to look at some key drivers. And to do that, we ran what's called a regression analysis. And when we do that, we can start to determine the strength of relationship to why someone says they started or continued to volunteer and whether or not they're more likely to have volunteered within the past 12 months. And when we run that type of analysis, we see that the focus is really on motivations. Motivations for continuing to give back have a very strong relationship to whether or not someone actually does continue to give back. I know that we have to be mindful of barriers. Obviously, there are significant barriers that that will cause people to not be able to give as much of their time, talent, voices, and treasure as they may want to. But when we look at how we can start to influence behavior and motivate and inspire, we found that meeting barriers doesn't have as strong a relationship. So if you're more likely to you're more likely to say that you give back, it's a stronger relationship than whether a certain barrier keeps you from giving back, I guess, if that makes sense. And again, hopefully, if you would like to talk more about this regression analysis, please join me in the booth later today. I'll try my best to get in there. You can leave a chat in there as well, and also look at the full presentation. When we start to dig into some of these reasons why, those continuing motivations, we start to see that some have a stronger relationship than others. And so, again, feeling fulfilled and appreciated, gaining experiences or contributing experiences, and staying active, all very strong relationships. And again, we have some moderately strong and strong relationships around just wanting to do more, knowing what it's like to struggle, and having that exposure to new people. Um, I'm not going to have time to go into some of the demographic layers to this, but we did look through these motivations from a demographic lens and a generational lens. And what we found was that older generations are much more likely to list feeling fulfilled and appreciated and giving of their skills as a factor for them continuing. Younger generations are more apt to value some of the tangible things they get out of volunteering and service, such as exposure to new people and experiences and networking opportunities. One barrier that we did look at, of all the barriers, we examined the strength of relationship, and while it was still weak overall, we did find it interesting that the strongest relationship of all the barriers to whether or not someone was more likely to say they hadn't volunteered in the past 12 months was this attribute right here: not having been invited or encouraged to volunteer, or just simply not knowing where to start. And so that's really where this conversation, I think, can start to take us, is how do we extend that invitation? Who do we get to help us extend that invitation? And then how do we make sure that the experiences that people are having while they're volunteering, when accepting that invitation, how do we ensure that those are the types of opportunities that keep them coming back? And so when we think about who's doing the asking and extending the invitation, we really, we traditionally think of nonprofits or organizations like Serve Virginia, who are recruiting and trying to get people to come into the tent. But we also wanted to look at how employers can play a role in this as well. And so when we did that, to get at that data point, we first asked respondents to consider how important it was to them for their employer to do things related to community engagement. And what we found was that they really, 8 out of 10 felt it was important, or very important, that their employer communicate regularly with them, not only to learn about what's important to them from a community perspective, but also to tell them what kinds of opportunities are out there that are in their community. These next three here, the 79 through 44, 74%. These are really some of those putting your money where your mouth is type of factors: offering paid time off and incentives for volunteering, matching employee contributions, offering pro bono services or profits, and donating those to community causes. And then the final two here, and while they're lowest on this list, it's worth pointing out that it's still over 2/3 say that it's important or very important to adopt formal policies that emphasize volunteer experience when hiring or promoting, and to sponsor volunteer activities for such as MLK or 9/11 Day of Service events. We then asked them, okay, this is what's important to you. So how do you feel your employers are doing at these various attributes? And what we see is that there's a significant drop in performance when we ask people to rate how their employers were doing versus how much importance they place on these things. And so while more than 50% do feel that their employers are communicating with them regularly and are, contributing profits and pro bono services to community causes and organizations, what this is really showing us is that there's a lot of opportunity for employers to get more involved in mobilizing some of their employees and team members to get out there and make a difference against community causes. So I see I'm at 20%. These are kind of some of the top line findings that I think our panel respondents will really be able to help flesh out for us. Again, there's a lot more here. We're going to be introducing this data more widespread, a lot more findings to come in our final reports that will come out here within the next month. And again, if you would like a little bit more than this, feel free to go and check out that resources section. But I want to really hear from others at this point, and so I am going to end this presentation, and hopefully we can have our panelists come up on stage, and I'll help them introduce themselves, and we'll get some conversation going.
Hi, I think I'm the first to introduce. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Vanessa Diamond, and I serve as the VP of Civic Engagement at the Community Foundation here in the Greater Richmond area. I also am on the Governor's Advisory Board and the Service Foundation. I am an AmeriCorps alum, so that is a huge thing. So shout out to all of you AmeriCorps members and AmeriCorps program staff and alumni out there. And I also serve on the board of Points of Light. So I am, we talked about all the many hats that many of us wear. My core focus in my work is civic engagement and volunteerism. And I come with a lens of really thinking about how do we do this on a global, statewide, and then really hyper focused on the Greater Richmond area.
Great. Oh, Joy, I think I see you speaking, but we can't hear you. Maybe Annalise or Alex can help troubleshoot, and perhaps while Leah introduces herself.
I can, yeah, no problem. Good morning. Y'all can hear me? Sorry, repeat that question, but okay. Yes, good morning. My name is Leah Gregory, and I currently work for VCU with the Wright Center for Clinical and Translational Research as their new community and collaboration program manager. I am a social worker, and for the past 12 years have worked directly with clients, community facing, as well as at organizations that really rely on volunteer support and volunteer work. So I think that what I took from being on this board on this panel today, and how I'm going to use the information that I've learned, is to really directly work with volunteers and understand what the community needs and tie that to what we can do and how we can improve um, health and well-being of folks that live in the state and in our communities.
Thanks, Leah. Joy, do you want to try again? I see you popped out and came back in. No, not quite. Not quite yet. We'll keep helping you troubleshoot here backstage. And May, if you would mind introducing yourself as well.
Great. Good morning. My name is May Navar. I'm a senior manager of community impact for Altria. Altria, we are a Fortune 200 company based in Richmond, Virginia, with 6,000 employees all across the country. We have a leading portfolio of tobacco products for U.S. tobacco consumers, 21 years of age or older. I also wear a couple other hats. I'm a founding member and chair of the Asian and Latino Solidarity Alliance that came about due to many of us volunteered and served, were appointed on gubernatorial boards, the Virginia Asian Advisory Board and the Virginia Latino Advisory Board. Several of us are either current members or current chairs or former chairs of those boards. So we decided we could come together and had some shared challenges and shared interests that also help serve other multicultural communities as well. I also am a member of Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities' state board and Richmond chapter. So it's a great opportunity for me to take this data and, with working for an employer that has 6,000 employees that are manufacturing and sales and unplugged and plugged. It's a great way for us to really get strategic and prioritize And then in the community, it's what are the community needs, and what is the best way to prioritize resources in order to meet those needs. So looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, May. And Joy, we try again. Oh no. Well, we will continue to work with Joy backstage here to try to figure out her audio until she's able to introduce herself. Though, let's get some conversation going. Vanessa, I was going to throw to you first a little bit. You all touched on, and I should say that all of the members of this panel were on the core team that we referenced earlier. So they've really been involved in this process from the start. But Vanessa has been a proponent of this for a long time. She was part of the team, the steering committee that also helped to shepherd the state service plan, of which this is one of the prime outputs of that plan or action areas against that plan. And so, Vanessa, I know that you've thought a lot about this. How do we capture community engagement and volunteerism? And so, from a top level perspective, why did you really want a study like this to happen? And what are some of the things that you're already seeing now that the data is starting to be released that you think is going to be most useful?
This is a project I have been like knocking on the door for probably 4 or 5 years. And it was really because I had gone to an NCOC event and I started to really understand that we needed data. We needed to have a really clear baseline in our state, and particularly in the greater Richmond area where, our community foundation is focused, so we can build better programming, so we can build better access points for volunteers and community members, so we can understand the holistic way that people want to show up for community. And so I just have to give an incredible gratitude to Kathy Spangler and Annalise and the SIR team for making this a reality. We had talked about doing this for about 2 years before COVID. And started talking to other funders. The Shaberg Foundation helped support this here locally. The Community Foundation invested money into the local version of what we're going to be doing with this. And a lot of people have been really interested in the idea of civic engagement. What does it mean for us to show up? Whether we're talking about traditional volunteering or voting or philanthropy or advocacy. But we haven't had a really good handle on what does that mean and why people are doing it and why they're not doing it. So to the way that this has developed, and I think for me, the core image that really helps make this project make a lot of sense for me is the slide you showed that really explain the core team. You've got people, I'm looking at it right now, you've got people from higher ed and K-12, you've got neighbors and community funders, people that are focused on national service in the military, people that are in faith-based organizations, civic and advocacy organizations. That is the web of our, social and civic network. That's our infrastructure. And we need to build better ties between each other so we can then understand how we amplify the volunteers and the community members and the neighbors, their voice, their dollars, their volunteer time. And so for me, this project is both about having that baseline data, but it's also about the relationships. It's the conversations we've had in the core meetings. It's the conversations that we'll continue to have that build the relationships between all of these entities whose role it is in the community to engage and to activate and to educate and to help them, with their philanthropy. And I think the stronger we build the infrastructure, the larger that ripple effect goes, so that we really can increase the access and the impact. And so I have a lot to say about this project. I'm obviously a super big champion of it and really thankful for kind of this first step that it's given us to have a baseline that we can really leap forward from. So I'll talk more later, but I just think this is an incredible opportunity for us to have a really good grounding.
That's great. I really appreciate the advocacy and the support you've given to the project, but also one thing that we weren't able to get to here that, again, I would encourage you to go to the presentation to check out is we were able to use this data to set a metric that we as an ecosystem and as individual organizations can use to track and measure how well we're doing at mobilizing. And again, it's a lot to get through because we're taking a bunch of questions and then making a composite score out of those. But hopefully, this is a first step in keeping us all unified, speaking the same language, using the same types of data points to see that we're all pulling in the same direction. One of the things that you said early on in your remarks, Vanessa, was trying to get a handle on what it means to show up. And so, Leah, I'd really love for your thoughts on that as somebody who has been very much involved in community organizing and community engaged research. Would love your thoughts on some of what you're seeing here, particularly as it comes to those informal acts that people are reporting having done, those neighbors helping neighbors types of things. So just love your thoughts on what you're seeing there and how that either aligns or doesn't align with some of the community level grassroots types of actions you've seen in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I think that one of the big takeaways that I've taken from this entire experience and this work is intentionality, right? And so, making sure that we're very intentional about the work that we're doing and that what that volunteerism looks like in community, right? And is that in line with what the community actually needs and wants, right? At this time. So yeah, from my perspective, we worked on a project a couple of years ago um, tied to AmeriCorps, and one thing that we saw, right, was exactly what showed up in this index was information that surrounding what informal volunteering looked like versus like organizational volunteering. And so one of kind of the biggest things that was understood was that organizational volunteering somehow has this like understanding of like I'm going outside of my community to then volunteer more versus more like informal volunteering, right, is here in my own community, and I don't necessarily see that as volunteering or doing something extra. It's just the things that I understand is helpful and contributes to the ecosystem of my community. And so, it was very interesting that that data point that showed, Black folks and Latinx folks, saying like, oh, well, yeah, I guess that is volunteering, right? Even though, me just helping my neighbor is just something that I do and I'm supposed to do, right? So yeah, so the data very much aligned with my understandings and what I'm seeing. I think the top three localities were health and education, were housing, right? Were yeah, health and well-being, right? All of those things that we understand are basic human rights, and folks seeing a lack of that in their communities, right? We all, I think we're all in the Richmond area here in this panel, but I think all of us here, attending this panel can see they're building new apartment buildings everywhere, right? There's no lack of new apartment buildings, but how many folks can actually afford to live in those luxury apartment buildings that they're building? There's a lack, and so I think that two things that this data is very important, right? Like intentionality, but also what is very important is that we're also understanding what we're actually doing and how we can actually contribute to these things. I think that housing, I think that education are sometimes very difficult things to volunteer around or like get into or fix, right? And so I think that those are always like the biggest things that our governments, our leaders are supposed to fix, and we're just not really seeing that happen. So yeah, I'll pause there. I can go all day, but I'll pause there. But yeah, the data that we found absolutely aligned with what I'm seeing in community from my perspective.
Thanks for that perspective, Leah. May, I do want to turn it over to you. I know you've got quite a few hats that you've wearing here as part of this core team and as part of this panel. But I was curious to gauge your reactions to some of that employer engagement. and also how you can see some of this data being used not just for folks at Fortune 500 companies that are in the community engagement sphere, but also some of these smaller organizations, and nonprofits can be employers too. How you see some of those findings and what people value from their employers, how you can see that being a way for us to kind of help start mobilizing more as well.
Yeah, I thought the part about several mentions of the interest and in communication, and it just doesn't really take much. I mean, I think when we think about volunteerism, right? There's like, let's get all of these logistics and infrastructure when just having maybe a real talk or a courageous conversation around the table, or in the beginning of a meeting, can be so valuable in seeking to understand each other's differences and finding out shared interests and goals, because I think in the end of the day, we all want like good schools and thriving communities. And usually what happens is that we have different ways of getting there, right? But having these conversations and understanding what our lived experiences are and where we're coming from, I think that's really important for employers to have. And that could happen whether you're an office of 10 to thousands, right? Is again going back to what Leo was saying, was being very intentional. It's very easy for employers to just get around the table and talk about the business, right? The bottom line. But if we don't take the time out to actually have conversations around issues that are happening in the communities in which we live, in which we play, in which we work, then we're not really deepening those relationships with each other. So, the communication part was really important. And I think whether you're the CEO or a people manager, modeling that from the top, initiating that, to do that to the start really helps set the stage for others to follow suit, allows employees to have a sense of belonging, to be able to feel comfortable to have those conversations. For example, Juneteenth is coming up, right? Have a conversation around, what is Juneteenth? And don't put that burden on the Black employees to do that, right? Take the time to do the research and then have a very open and honest conversation. And then take that even further, have a volunteer event that supports a nonprofit that supports the Black and Brown community. Have dinner or have lunch at a Black owned and operated restaurant, right? There's so many ways to really wrap ourselves around the work that needs to be done to understand the issues that are impacting our communities. And again, I think employers can really take the lead in doing that. And I think that will empower others to then feel empowered to step up and do it as well. So that's kind of what struck me first.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned just the simple act of going and supporting a Black-owned business through a restaurant or whatever it may be. That's not even something that we're able to quantify through this study. And so while we do have perhaps a stronger handle on some of the engagement activities that are out there, there are still some things that I'm sure people really want to know. And so, Vanessa, I'll throw it to you a little bit to kind of think about, what are some other things, now that you've seen this, what are some other things that you really want to know, whether it's finding some connections between data points or finding ways to quantify more areas of civic engagement? Where do these findings start to lead you for next steps and what you really want to find out next?
I think I just want to like hone in on both what Leah and May said. It's about the intentionality of action, and I think that is what we are all after. Is we are in a different world post George Floyd, post this pandemic, and I think it has forced us to face very significant histories, challenges, barriers in our community. And what this allows us to do is, again, have that baseline to say we can do this better. we can engage more meaningfully with mutually beneficial acts that are based on dignity and respect and communication and pausing, and everything that we're talking about is increasing civic engagement, but not just by numbers, but by depth and by focus. And I think the huge thing that we are all after, and as we're starting to look at the data, is to figure out what are the barriers towards people wanting to get involved in their own communities to understand community issues, and then what are the barriers of community organizations, what's their capacity to engage. A lot of community organizations don't have the ability to engage the community the way that they want to, because they've got to build their internal capacity. And I think as a foundation and a volunteer center hub and a capacity builder, that is really our focus, is thinking about how do we make those matches and how do we do it with real intention on both ends, right? Both ends need preparation and understanding and cultural competencies, and both volunteers and community organizations need to figure out how do we do this work in a way that is achieving impact and creating a civic experience for an individual to understand what it means to be a part of a democracy, to be a part of community, and responsible. We are all responsible. And that's what I think the most amazing thing is about all the work we do, is that every single one of us that are on this call and in your networks, our jobs or our volunteer time or our board service is about creating access, not just for ourselves, but for other people to find their path, to engage, to be a part of community. And when I'm looking at the data and I'm looking at our next steps, I'm looking at both sides. I'm trying to figure out how do we work with our corporate partners? How do we work with our civic organizations to help engage and educate them about issues so that when they are stepping out into community, they're doing so in the way that May was talking about, with thoughtfulness and questions, curiosity, and an understanding. The education was a key piece in this. People want to learn. An understanding of what are the core barriers that are out there. Why does this happen? What is the causality of the issues that we're facing, so we can address those. And then on the other side, we're really focused on how do we help nonprofits and community organizations and our government and school partners better know how to bring people into their mission, how to educate them, and how to engage them so that they're achieving mission. And so this is really like on both sides of the puzzle that we play in. We're really thinking about how do we build that kind of capital, human capital on both ends. And so our team always talks about the fact our entire job is to help people build the skills and knowledge to do good, no matter who they are. We don't care if they're corporate partners or faith-based organizations, nonprofits, or individuals. We really want to activate people's understanding of who they are and how they can show up. And a lot of the data in here is going to help us figure out what some of those key barriers have been, and then what are some programming that we put in place for it.
I want to call attention to a question that just popped up in the chat here about ideas for engaging businesses. And I'll put it out to the entire group here about how we engage our businesses. But before you answer, I do want to frame that a little bit more too, because when we looked at those issues of trust, local businesses were number 2. I want to say, I should double check that, but I believe they were the second most trusted. And when we dug into some demographic factors as well, some of the people who said that they did not volunteer for an organization within the past 12 months, their trust levels for nonprofits were lower than local businesses. And so I think from a trust standpoint, businesses can play a role. Local businesses was the definition. When we asked them to rate corporations, it wasn't as high. But I think that's all part of the same equation, is how do we get just some ideas from this panel on how to make that first step if you're a nonprofit or looking to get involved. How do you engage business in this?
May, do you want to take that?
Sure, I can jump in because I actually wanted to maybe even add on to what you were saying earlier. Andy, there was a slide about the invitation, right? And something I learned over time, in terms of like leading volunteer groups, you have to be very, very specific about what it is that you can contribute. And then, very specific about the amount of time that you can commit to, and then be very specific about what you want to get out of the experience as well. Because without that communication, it's very difficult to really make this a win-win meaningful experience for both sides. So what I would say from a Altria standpoint, as an example, and an employer, sometimes like you have skills that you probably don't even realize that you can offer to a nonprofit. And same thing, vice versa, a nonprofit can seek out in a company and say, for example, hey, you're a financial services company, can you offer some pro bono work, skills-based volunteering, and help a particular nonprofit with budgeting? If you're a marketing and communications branding company, can you offer help to a nonprofit design their logo, their communication strategy? And then if you're on the nonprofit side, as I've learned as a founder of a nonprofit, it's being, again, very specific about what is it that I need at this moment for our nonprofit. I'm going to go seek out the people who have the skills for that. So again, specificity and communication, and invite and even solicit and ask. Don't be afraid to ask, because you never know. First of all, I find that people are very flattered when you ask folks for help, and it's amazing to see how people are so willing to do that, because what we, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. We all want something good, and we all want our communities to thrive. So I'd say, again, from both sides, be very specific, communicate, and don't be afraid to even ask and invite others.
Yeah, May, I, agree absolutely with everything that you said. Also, just thinking about, as a business, as a local business, how are you supporting that community? What is your role in, supporting that community? Are you a grocery store, right? So we know grocery stores at the end of, when stuff starts to expire, okay, can I donate that to a local food pantry? Those sorts of things. We think about, okay, also local businesses are providing jobs, right? And supporting, right, the local economy of different communities too. So I think that it's important that we start to just maybe take a step back as a business and think, well, how am I contributing to this community, and what can I do? Can I support a local sports team at a tournament they might be having? There's a lot of different ways that I think businesses can get really creative about really digging in and rooting itself in the community, because again, it's that ecosystem, right?
Vanessa brought up.
Vanessa, sorry, Andy. Vanessa, you and I have had a conversation around power dynamics. I would love if you don't mind sharing about power dynamics. I think it's important to talk about that relationship.
So I would just say I think that the corporate engagement is a really complicated field, and so those of you that are interested in engaging corporate partners, or if you're a corporate partner and you're interested in developing a community relationship, everything that we've talked about so far of intentionality and preparation is really important, because there are massive power dynamics between corporations, no matter if it's a small, mid-sized business or a major corporation who has a foundation, and the nonprofit sector. We could have a whole other session on what corporate social responsibility is and why it's so important, and how it helps change the culture of the corporation. And millennials are not just asking for corporate and businesses to be engaged, they are demanding it. They are choosing their jobs based on the corporate mission or the engagement of that business. There is a ton of research and ideation around really the changing purpose of business, and that really the expectation that businesses are showing up in a much more intentional way. And then at the same time, it isn't always an equal partnership, and we have to acknowledge that. No matter how a business may try to create good relationships, there's always a power dynamic, and there's always a sense of privilege and access and financial exchange that we have to address. For those of you in the greater Richmond area, or for anyone, actually, you can go. We have a website called RVA Engage. May has participated that. I think Leah has actually partnered with us on some projects in the past. Many of you in the greater Richmond area have, and it is a coalition of corporate partners, university partners, some K-12 civic organizations, and nonprofit organizations that have we actually spent probably like the last 8 years trying to build relationships to address the power dynamics. And we developed something called our principles of engagement. And we were really trying to ground ourselves and ground corporate partners and nonprofits and trying to say this needs to be mutually beneficial. We need to be able to acknowledge that both the nonprofit and the community have assets and resources and knowledge that need to be valued. It's not just the corporations that are coming with value. And so, just really being intentional. So if you are, out there and you're interested in corporate engagement or, really working with larger institutions, please take a look at our site, RB Engage. It's really an amazing coalition between a lot of us in the Central Richmond area and University of Richmond and VCU, and many of our corporate partners to try to address the power dynamics and set a better stage for some mutually beneficial relationships. And it is even, I was saying that we're in a different world now than we were 4 years ago. We started this work 8 years ago. And it has been it is a slow build to build these kinds of relationships. So, check that out. And hopefully that is a good starting point for people to start thinking about it. And if you like those principles, you can take them, you can change the font on them. They are yours. You can edit them. We really just want to, scale and socialize this idea of being very intentional around these power dynamics in relationships and build more mutually beneficial engagement.
And one thing I'll add too is,
did I miss anything, May? Tell me.
No, you were fantastic, because I think that's a really important thing to take things a little bit further as folks invite and ask, right? Is just to be very aware of that. And then I think, from an execution standpoint is, and look, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but making sure it's not transactional in nature, that it's transformative experiences, again going back to intention and meaningful. It's not to do it because it's going to make my company or my business look good, right? It's not performative. It's certainly transformative. And so just bearing all that in mind is to do it because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for the community, but it's not because it's going to, again, be a great PR stunt.
Also, from the perspective of a community organizer, there are a lot of these organizations that are embedded in these communities and already know what their communities need. And so, a very good strategy is to hone in and check in on these organizations that are already doing needs assessments, right? They already have the data, they already know what they need and how to do it. So an important kind of strategy is to check in with the people that are already doing that work.
And I think that's a great point, Leah, in terms of how we start to build more nuance and intentionality around these community priorities that we asked people to rate. Again, it was a difficult choice. We forced people to pick three, and so when we do start to dig into these community priorities and needs, definitely the best sounding boards are going to be with those grassroots organizations, people at the community level who can say, yes, this is reflective, or I'd like to look at this more closely for our region. And we have the ability to do that based on the sample size, to look by larger geographic regions, the Department of Social Services regions. Can't necessarily get down to specific city level or zip code level yet, but there are lots of ways to zero in and focus some of these data points to really see how reflective they are, and then amplify that and get responses to that. We're closing in on about 15 minutes left. I'm hoping we can keep talking, but I'd really, Annalise, if you're backstage with us, if there's anybody out in the audience that has a question, please put it in the chat. Or I think Annalise if you want to raise your hand, and you can even be pulled up on stage here, and you can show yourself and unmute yourself and ask a question. Would welcome, and I'm sure the panel would welcome the opportunity to hear from you and some specific questions you may have about what we've talked about. While people do, I will say, Vanessa had brought up how we're in a different world post 2020, and that's true. And we did ask in terms of barriers the quintessential burnout question: are people burnt out? Overall, we had 15% say that they are. But what's striking is really that the folks who reported decreasing the frequency with which they have volunteered in the past 12 months, they were significantly more likely to say that they were burnt out and that the issues are just too big. And so when we think about mobilization, May, you had touched on this on a previous conversation we had. Burnout is real. We all feel it. In fact, one of the top education priorities was teacher burnout. And so it's very top of mind. So when we think about the ask, what are some ideas that this panel has, and May, you had mentioned this specifically, of not overburdening, especially since we have a good handle on who's actually engaging here? How do we make sure that when we ask, we're not asking too much of people, and we're not asking too much of the folks that we know are our best engagers?
I'll start because I think Maine's thinking about what your prior conversation was.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you're going to ask people to engage, my two things that we talk about here in our body of work is help them understand the why. That is really important. Often when nonprofits bring volunteers in, or if you're engaging in community work, we're moving so fast that sometimes we forget to really help people understand the why and have that sense of connection and empathy and understanding. And so I think that is huge. Like we've got, the whole book is start with why, it's really important. And then the second thing is to really be ready for them. If you are in a formal organization, or if you're starting something as a community initiative, be ready. Don't bring people in unless you're really ready to engage them in a meaningful way. Because what happens, and there's a ton of research out there that I can talk about with the retention and leaky bucket. 6 out of 10 volunteers walk away and don't return. Why? It's because they've had a bad volunteer experience, because the organization wasn't ready, they weren't treated well, there wasn't enough preparation done. So those volunteers are walking away, and not just walking away from that organization, they're walking away from volunteer engagement in general. They're going bowling, they're going to the movies, they're watching Netflix. I don't know. They're choosing other things to do with their time, because if they don't feel like their time is well used, they're going to find other things. So what we are really trying to focus on is how do we keep the leaky bucket? How do we keep volunteers in the work? Because if they show up, what we want is for them to have a really good experience, understand the nonprofit or the issue that organization or initiative is addressing. And then they're talking to their friends and their neighbors about the work, not about a bad experience that they had. Because I think that has a ripple effect on people's trust of the nonprofit sector and their sense of efficiency of the nonprofit sector. And I really want to guard that it is one of my highest priorities in our work, because nonprofits are incredible. They are doing our society's sometimes most complicated work with a small amount of resources. People are innovative. They are smart. They are getting things done. Sorry for the little hands-on, the AmeriCorps is getting things done, but we are getting things done with a real small amount of resources, and often are judged as being inefficient and or totally purpose-based and not organizationally based. And I think that's a false analysis. And so I think when we bring community members into our work, we have to really make sure that we are guarding not just the reputation of our organization, but the reputation of this field as being really innovative change makers. So that's my little soapbox on this, because I really think that when we bring people in, we want them to know that we are really being innovative, and we are excellent at what we do, and that volunteer experience really does matter.
Well, I think that's a great segue into just some closing remarks from each of you. I see May, you unmuted there, and you had a response here, so I'm going to let you go. I'm sorry, I saw you at the same time I started opening my mouth.
That's okay. No worries. I'm sorry I don't remember exactly, because I was probably talking a lot. but in all seriousness, I mean, this burnout piece, I would just say a little goes a long way, and it doesn't mean that as a volunteer, I have to go in and like tackle the big the big problem. Um, Maybe just again go, as Leo was saying, what is the need of the, let's say, the nonprofit? Go and say, how can I help you? I
Yeah.
have skills in blank, 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 blank.
Right.
How can I, does any of that, can that help serve you? And it could start out with a task. It could start out with a project. Then next, you dive deeper and you become part of a committee. Then from there, maybe you serve on the board of that nonprofit, right? There are ways to, again, just get a little feel for it. And then sometimes, the reality too is maybe it's not the right fit, and that's okay.
Hmm.
Because it could be not the right fit from the nonprofit standpoint or from your individual. Because again, it has to meet your passion, your desire, fulfillment even. So keep seeking that out, and so hopefully from there it doesn't turn out to be a burnout. And then even from a financial contribution standpoint, $5, believe it or not, goes away, because a lot of it can be small donors. It doesn't have to be big dollars that come in, but every little bit helps. So one bite at a time, and then next thing you know, it just becomes like me, and it just, like, you wear a lot of hats. But it feels great afterwards, because you're really contributing your skills and your talent to whatever causes you're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. I just also want to kind of support May, what you said about, if it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit, and that's okay. That is okay, right? And so I think that, when we talk about burnout, I think one of the biggest things is that sometimes maybe we feel like we have to, and it couldn't be working because it's just not working, and that's fine that we find maybe a different avenue or a different opportunity. And because again, I'll just go back to, these organizations are doing this work, right, on shoestring budgets, on the resources that are given to them, and they know how to do it, and they know how to use those resources to the best of their ability, and the most efficient way, right? So, we're thinking about different avenues and different strategies and different ways. $5 could be just what they need, and that's all, right? It could be maybe like some consulting on budgeting or something like that. But just also from a standpoint of bringing in volunteers, also those volunteers being open to maybe different needs, and being like, okay, this is what I want to give, but if this is all that they need, then that's fine, and kind of just stepping back. So, yeah.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, just lots of affirmations. Again, just kind of affirming what you all are saying about why it's so important to know your why and to ask with specificity. And really, we have one here that says, I read somewhere that it takes 10 good experiences to overcome one bad. And that feels right. It can be that way. When we think about barriers and beyond burnout, the one of the key things, and again, you'll see some barrier slides in the full report. We talked about the not necessarily the strength of relationships to barriers and whether or not that correlates to whether they haven't volunteered. But we know time and convenience barriers, childcare, transportation. Those are barriers that we're all going to face. What we found, though, is that apart from time and lack of convenience, that next bucket really falls into that inspiration. It could be somebody who feels, hey, I work in a helping profession, I serve others through my work, and that's kind of
Yeah.
enough for me. Again, there's the burnout, hard to find fulfilling opportunities to match my interests and skills, and one that says I feel uncomfortable, unprepared, or unqualified to help others directly was another one that kind of falls into that lack of inspiration or lack of confidence to get out there. And so my closing thought is to just, when we invite, it's okay to give voice to these barriers when we extend an invitation, and it's good to acknowledge that they exist, and know what we, as community organizers, as employers, as heads of nonprofits, as employees and team members, we're working to ensure that none of those barriers that are related to time, money, childcare, transportation, that they exist. But until then, one of the things that we can do is help them overcome some of those initial hesitancy or emotional barriers that they may face. Any last thoughts from the panelists? I know Kathy Spangler, Director of Serve Virginia, had a few closing remarks for the session. But any final thoughts from the panelists before I kick over to Kathy? I'd welcome.
Yeah, a prior conversation that you and I had segues perfectly from what you just said. If I don't have the time, it's amazing what just even a phone call can do or to help make connections, right? So it's not necessarily, May, can you do more? It's about leveraging my network, my community, my platform to bring more others in that maybe are interested in volunteering but don't know how to start. And so that doesn't take that much more out of me, but just maybe a conversation or just say, oh, I know this nonprofit over here needs help. You are great at this. Let me help make that connection for you. That's again, not going to get me to the burnout mode at all. So again, I can also go on and on and on. So thank you again for having me.
My last comment is what May just said, and my challenge to everybody here is to really think about yourself as an amplifier. We are pollinators in our communities, and we can help connect people to volunteerism, to advocacy, to education, to voting, and we're helping people find their own pathways. So, like, embrace that, because that means that we are multiplying the impact and the time that we're spending. That is why we are all here, is that we're in that role. And so really embrace it, kind of take that charge on, because that is how we create, I think, systemic and long-term cultural change and impact change in our community. So.
And I will round it off with just kind of adding also that, the most important thing in all of this work is relationship building. And so now all of you all in the audience now have some new friends, some new connections in all of us. So, we're very excited, very open to having you all reach out to us. There could be possibilities, there could be opportunities out there. And we appreciate all of you, all of our work, and we're doing good work. So
Great. Well, thanks again to each of you. I'm sorry we weren't able to have two other panelists join us due to technical difficulties, but this was still a great conversation. And I'll kick it over to Kathy to close the session out. Take it away, Kathy.
Well, thanks, Andy. Your perspectives are so relevant and uplifting. You've made such a contribution to shaping first the Community Engagement Index that is now, helping us understand how to use data so that we can affirm and shape and guide all of our efforts. The work you do each and every day, clearly, you are top of game, and we're just really grateful and proud to have you with us on a team and just benefit from all of your thought leadership. As we try to strengthen our communities and engage more people from all walks of life, the pearls of wisdom that you shared this morning, I think, for those of us that are here today and are present and are participating, what a gift. So thank you so much. It's been a very special week to be with all of you here. And I want to thank you all for attending the Virginia Volunteerism Summit. It's a labor of lots of effort, lots of hands, but certainly having you with us makes it all worth it. So thanks for being here today and all week. I'd like to also thank our foundation, the Virginia Service Foundation, and the Governor's Advisory Board for Service and Volunteerism. They are volunteers who guide and advise and support the work we do, and we couldn't do it. We're a very small team at Serve Virginia, and we couldn't do all of this without them. So we're very grateful to their participation, to their thought leadership, for their guidance and support. And you've seen many of them in the last 2 days. And, I want to make sure that you recognize, and it's right there on the front page of the summit, that we have a number of donors who've supported making this event and the work of the Virginia Service Foundation happen throughout the year. So I'd like to thank them for making this a very affordable program for all of us, and for just being week. And they've given of their time, and they've shared their experience and their insights and their expertise. And they've really, I think, affirmed that pursuing and pairing our passion with purpose is something that is embodied. It's not new. It's just an affirmation that this is who we are and what we do across our multifaceted sector of community engagement and civic action. So thank you to all of our speakers who are here. You know, I want to give a special shout out to my colleagues at Serve Virginia, but would like to especially note Annalise Gamble and Alex Vanek for their coordination of this event, and would love it if you would show them some cheers in the chat or with some emojis. Just let's make sure that Annalise and Alex know that all of their hard work is appreciated by each and every one of us to bring this event together. You know, I've floated through the whole summit and tried to get a snippet of many of the sessions that we've had. And as I reflect on the last 2 days, you know, I think of Susano, who taught us about reflection and volunteer engagement, and Sarah Milston, who talked about grace in the workplace. You know, I really enjoyed learning about the ABCDs from Jim Moynihan, and you know, that's asset-based community development. It was a very exciting session. And, you know, I could go on and speak about every one of our speakers. They've provided us with pearls of wisdom and practical ideas for tackling our work with passion and purpose. You know, we were wowed. I was wowed by our National Service awardees, our recipients, who have incredible stories to share and have made tangible impacts in their years of service. Kudos to all of our currently serving and alumni of all AmeriCorps programs and of other national service. They are pearls, they are leaders, they are essential to the backbone of the work that we do each and every day. We tried something new this year. We added booths, and hopefully you visited all of the booths and also had our tables. I particularly would want to call out 211 Virginia. They were with us new this year. This is an incredible service that is available to Virginians 24/7, 365 days a year to support people in need. It is a composite of services that it's a referral program. So if you have programs that offer critical services to people in need, make sure that you are registered and included in 211 Virginia's resource directory so that we can let people know that your services are available to them. I think that would be really a helpful action to take as part of this event. You know, if you've been with us the 3 days, you've seen that we've shared updates on the state service plan. It's been woven throughout. Certainly the Virginia Community Engagement Index and that data. We're excited about the Serve Virginia brand launch and our new Pairing Passion with Purpose recruitment campaign that you will be seeing in the days and weeks and months ahead, that we invite you to join us and participate with us. Again, we can't do our work without partnering with and through you. And so we hope you will join us on this journey of taking this data, making it relevant to decision making around tackling key issues, and amplifying and recruiting the volunteers that are needed to bring their time and their talent and their voices to these efforts that will make a difference across the Commonwealth. I want to remind everybody that the recordings, again, from this summit are going to be accessible to delegates for up to 30 days so that you can take the content back home with your teams. And I really want to encourage everybody to complete the summit survey that will be sent out over the next week. It really is important for us to hear from you about what worked, where we might improve or expand, and what you would like to see in 2024. So please look for that coming in your inbox, and do take the time to let us know your thoughts and your recommendations, because it's really vitally important that we meet your needs as we pull these events and programs together. We're about to go into our last two breakout segments. They look very interesting, and I hope that you will stay engaged. We won't be coming back in a closing plenary. That's why I'm saying thank you to all of you now, and offering my thoughts on the importance of this week. But I'd like to, just say once again that our purpose is your success. And everything that we're able to invest in, everything that we're organizing around, everything that we are putting our energies toward is intended to build greater awareness of the value and benefit of the work that you do, the role that volunteerism and service plays in making our communities rich, and the importance of civic action as a driver for success for individuals, families, and communities. I can't thank you enough again for your participation. You're chatting me up in the chat, and for all of your efforts each and every day that make the Commonwealth just an incredible place to live, work, and play. Thank you so much, and please stay in touch. Have a great rest of the summit.